Hey Maya, I'm just putting the pinned comment. I gotta spell your name with intimacy. I can't spell intimacy with Maya. Hello.
Hey. All right, can
I
you hear
don't.
me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. How are you doing?
I'm good. You'll get people in here. I haven't used this page in a long time because I'm doing that whole rebrand thing.
Yeah, I mean, look, don't worry about it because also the good thing about this is that we're going to take it into an IGTV video,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
it doesn't really matter how many people are here live because we'll still have this content to post in a video form.
Yes. It'll still be accessible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I'm excited to
So
talk about these topics.
I am too. Do you want to give a little introduction? Let us know who you are.
Yes. So, hi everyone. My name is Maya. I use she, her pronouns, and I am from my Instagram page, Intimacy with Maya. So, today I'm here to talk with Jazz about safe sex, specifically. And I also, for some of my background, I am currently in grad school, so I'm getting my PhD in sociology and studying intimacy through that lens. And I also have a BA in gender and sexuality studies. So I also approach a lot of these conversations from those two different perspectives.
Yes. So I met Maya during Happy Main Character Energy Retreat hosted by Shan Boudram and Lauren Morrison. And it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. And I met a lot of people I wanted to work with. And Maya was like on the go. So I'm excited.
Yes, so are you. So
I'm
this should be good.
very
A good
grateful.
conversation.
Yeah. So do you want to just hop on in then?
Yeah, let's get started.
All right. Well, first and foremost, happy Pride Month
Thank you.
to all of the Pride members.
Yes.
I don't know the proper way to address Happy Pride Month.
And to anyone who's celebrating.
Yes, to anyone who's celebrating. So let's first talk about, so I'm in a heterosexual relationship and you are in a homosexual relationship. Is that how I would? Okay.
Yeah, I
I'm still
typically
learning
say
the proper
lesbian.
language to use.
Yeah, I typically say lesbian, but yeah.
Okay. So what does safe sex look like for our relationships?
Yeah. So I think this is a really good question because there's two realms of safe sex. So one realm is preventing unwanted pregnancies through the use of contraceptives, and the other realm is protecting against the transmission of STIs and STDs. So when it comes to people who are having vaginal intercourse sex, they do have to think about this question of contraceptives and preventing pregnancy. But for people who are not having that kind of sex, which is queer people, but it's also straight people who are having sex that's not vaginal, oral sex, right? Anal sex, different kinds of sex like that, they have to think about this aspect as well. So I do want to flag that there's these two realms, right, to safe sex.
Yeah.
It's not just preventing pregnancy and taking birth control. It's also thinking about the prevention of STIs transmission.
Yes. So, and the STI transmission and that, what types of sex is that more common for and the protection against it?
Yeah, so STIs can be transmitted through any kind of sex, whether it's vaginal, anal, oral, etc. And this is because different STIs are transmitted through different mechanisms. So for some, they're transmitted through oral or fluid contact. Others are transmitted through like skin to skin contact. So any type of sex has the risk of transmitting STIs and STDs, which is why we have to think about it. And so I know next week we'll be talking all about how to slow the transmission of STIs and STDs, and I'll be talking about destigmatization as well as some of the other types of barriers. But again, like I said, those two components are present.
Yes, and then other stuff that goes into the protection against things with penetrative sex with the penis is pregnancy, so like birth control and stuff like that. So actually, my baby's 6 months. And when I,
Adorable.
I had to get into birth control and stuff like that. And I was always very like nervous about like putting things like, it's birth control. Like I didn't know everything about what I'm putting in my body. So I felt more in control taking the pill.
Mm-hmm.
But then if you don't keep up with it, then it's not as helpful,
Yeah.
to preventing pregnancy, which is how I have my child because I was on the
Mm.
pill. But I had gotten the IUD after my 6 weeks was up, and actually my uterus was still shrinking after pregnancy, and so it pushed it out. So, and
Yeah.
so I have to try something else.
Yeah, yeah. So I'll give a brief overview about the different types of contraceptives. Because, like you said, birth control is not the only one, like the pills. And so I want to give a brief overview as to the different kinds. So there are hormonal birth controls and then there's non-hormonal birth controls. And I'm specifically going to be talking about birth controls that people should use if they're perhaps interested in having kids down the line. There are more permanent forms of birth control, but I won't be like addressing those as directly. So the hormonal forms of birth control essentially work by disrupting the body's natural hormonal cycle by doing things such as stopping the person from ovulating, which means that a woman's body or person who has ovaries are not going to release eggs. So that's one way that hormonal birth controls work. And there's a whole bunch of different hormonal birth controls. There's not only the pill, but there's also the shot, there's implants, there's patches. So there's all different kinds of hormonal birth controls. And like I said before, then there's also non-hormonal birth controls. And so these work through different mechanisms. But one of the mechanisms is spermicide. So essentially that does what it sounds like it does. It kills sperm once it enters the vagina. And then there's also other kinds of non-hormonal birth controls, such as IUDs that don't use hormones. And of course, condoms for both people who have penises and people who have vulvas. So I totally agree. I do think that people should be educated about the types of birth control that they're putting into their bodies, how those birth controls work, any potential side effects, how to make sure that the birth controls are the most effective, how to use them in the proper way. So I'm glad that we're talking about this because I think some people just assume that if they just use any kind of birth control, they're protecting themselves against everything, including STIs. But they also might be protecting themselves against pregnancy, but that's not necessarily the case if you're not using it the right way.
Right. In which cases do we not have to use a contraceptive or a condom? Because, everyone's like, oh, like raw sex is the better sex. But then, like, we do have these numbers, statistically, with STIs and STDs.
Right, absolutely. So when it comes to contraceptives, the times to not use them are times when you are wanting to be pregnant or okay with being pregnant. And this is also a point in our conversation that I want to mention that like the pull-out method is not effective. And so again, if you're
No.
using the pull-out method, yes, if you're using that method, then you have to understand that, or I recommend that you're in a place where you're okay with the possibility of being pregnant.
Yes.
So that's kind of when it comes to contraceptives, when to not use them, pretty much when you want to be pregnant, or if you've undergone a procedure and you have a more permanent style of birth control, such as getting your tubes tied and things like that, then it's fine to not have a pill or anything like that. But that's the only time that you're probably not going to want to use contraceptives if you're sexually active, of course.
Okay.
And then when it comes to condoms, so condoms are used not only for contraceptives, but also to protect against the transmission of STIs and STDs, right? So times to not use those are when you're fully clear on your sexual history. So you've been tested for STIs and STDs yourself, and you're fully clear on the partner, that your sexual partner's sexual history as well, and that they've been tested for STIs and STDs since the last time they had sex with someone else. So if that's the case and you are in a relationship where you're only having sex with each other and you trust that person, because there is a level of trust here that has to be talked about, then it's okay to not use a condom then. But like I said, you have to make sure that you do trust that person.
Right. And so how often do you think someone should get tested when they're in a relationship where they're not using any protection?
Yes. So I'm not exactly sure what the range is. I've heard anywhere from every 3 to 6 months. But that's something that I would encourage people to look up because that is not a piece of knowledge that I brought to the conversation today. So I don't want to mislead anyone.
Okay. And then also, like, just for anybody, like, don't be afraid to ask your partner, you know, if they've been tested or can we go get tested, because, you know, your sexual relationship is something that, like, you want to be safe and you want it to be fun. And as long as it's safe, you can have as much fun as you want.
Right. Absolutely.
So,
And so we're going to get into that throughout the month. Later in the month, we'll be talking about the difference between safe sex and healthy sex. And so that's something I'm really passionate about, because safe sex is not the end of the conversation. So often we act like it is. And I do believe that by not talking about healthy sex, people end up having sex that's not safe. So we're going to be talking about that. Like I said before, we're going to be talking about STI destigmatization and all of these great things. So there's definitely more to come with that.
yes. And then lastly, what would you say is the right time for me to be ready to have sex?
So if we're thinking about someone who has yet to have a sexual encounter or sexual experience, or maybe they're just trying to start over and they're trying to think about how can I enter into this realm in a way that's safe and honors my individuality and is going to be as pleasurable as possible, then these tips are for you. So I'm going to give some takes that I think are maybe a bit uncommon. So just bear with me, because I have put a lot of thought into how to think about how to approach having sex with people. So in general, I think about a progressive approach to having sex with other people. So often we're not sexually active for a period of time or ever, and then boom, we just try to be sexually active. We try to go essentially from 0 to 100, right? And I think that it's better to try to think about a slower progression towards the most extreme types of sex. So one type of progression that I like to think about is having dipped your toe into the waters of exploring your own body and your own sexuality before having sex with someone else. So I'm not saying you have to be done with that journey or anything like that, because that takes years. But perhaps you've actually used the mirror to look at your genitals, to look at your vulva. Perhaps you've actually watched porn that's ethical porn or feminist porn, and not just the stuff on Pornhub, because so often that's not realistic and it can even be violent at times. So perhaps you've done these smaller things to just get comfortable with your body, with sexual images and things like that. Now, ideally, what I would love for people to do before having sex with other people is to actually experience sexual pleasure themselves. So what I mean by that, I don't necessarily mean you have to have an amazing orgasm before you have sex with someone else. That's a lot of pressure. But when you know what your body feels like while it's experiencing sexual pleasure by yourself, when you go to have sex with someone else, then you can't be tricked into thinking, oh, my body just doesn't work. Oh, my body's not capable of experiencing sexual pleasure. Oh, I guess sex just is supposed to suck or not feel that great, right? Because so often, unfortunately, many girls and women go months or years of their lives having mediocre or downright bad sex because they think that that's how sex is supposed to feel. And so if you actually try to experience some sexual pleasure with yourself before adding another person to the equation, I think that that can be a really great recipe for success, to end up having a sexual experience with another person where your pleasure is a part of the experience.
Right. Do you think that there's like an age on like the right time? Because like we have like the teen, you know, like when you're teenagers have sex, it happens. Also, I also think that like with the sex education in the schools versus how we're talking now, all of this stuff isn't stuff that's taught in school. So without making it like you shouldn't have sex until you're this age, what can we do to be more like for the younger generation to understand and know what they need to know for themselves to explore their sexuality?
Yeah, so I think, if we're thinking about how to educate the younger generation, whether it's through parenting, through cousins, family members, or just the way that we talk in open space about these topics, I do think that talking in the way that I just described about taking more of a progression through getting to know your own body before you add someone else into the equation can be a really great way to talk to other people and to younger people about this. But I do also know that like there are other approaches that people in other countries take. So I read this research article about parents in the Netherlands and how they take this approach of they accept that teenagers are having sex and they try to more so encourage their teenagers to have sex in their later teenage years and to have sex with people that they're in relationships with for some period of time. And it's even the case that like some parents, or actually most parents in the Netherlands, are okay with their kids having sex within their own homes, as long as it's within these parameters of the later teen years and within relationships with another person. So that is another way to think about it. And the reason why this happens, or the reason why they take this approach, is because they believe that just like parents are active agents in any other aspect of their children's lives, helping them learn how to study for school, helping them learn how to communicate properly in public, they don't see why they can't bring that essentially the same energy to the development of their child's sexuality. And so they try to start in these more safer environments, having sex at home, right? That's a lot safer than having sex in the back of a car at a park. And being able to talk to their children about their experiences, trying to prepare their children for these experiences, and just having candid conversations about sex, sexuality, and what kind of comes with that. And so I think that that's a really interesting approach. Of course, it's not a perfect approach, because I don't mean to fetishize, sex and relationships and how every person who's in a relationship is having great sex, but that's not the case. But it's just to show that there are different ways to think of a more step-by-step progressive approach to having sex, even at these younger ages. And the last thing I'll say on this topic is that this is kind of a foreign concept for a lot of people in the US, because the thought of parents allowing their kids to have sex in their homes is pretty foreign for most people. And so we don't really have a lot of language in the US to talk about this, how to help younger people develop a healthy relationship to sexuality. Unfortunately, the approach that we so often take is don't have sex, don't talk about it around me, and then when you're an adult, okay, do whatever you want. But that means that we're not active agents at all in helping those kids develop a healthy sexuality. So that's something I'm really passionate about as well.
Definitely. And too, it also helps with just like, if I had waited a while, and I don't want to say so I first had sex when I was 20 years old. So, but I had learned from my friends' experiences plus what I learned in school. Mm-hmm. So I swear sometimes I was really gung-ho about it. I had my partner and I was like, I'm ready. I'm just going to relax, because I heard if you relax, it doesn't hurt. Mm-hmm. And that was what it was for me. And I had a great first time. And mm-hmm. We talk about the first time having sex with anybody can be awkward or uncomfortable. And I think also safe sex comes with having the open conversation about boundaries. Mm-hmm. And the things that I like, the things that I don't like. And that's also why, to go back to why it's important to explore your own sexuality and what makes you feel the best, and then sharing that with your partner so that you both have a wonderful safe sex experience.
Yes, I absolutely agree. That's the key. It's knowing yourself, or at least being open to knowing yourself, and being open to know someone else and to explore someone else.
Yes. And then one last thing, because this is something that people kind of get there's a lot of stigmatization on the number of partners somebody has. Is safe sex any more or less effective with how many partners you're sleeping with in a number of time?
Yeah, so this goes back to what I was saying before in terms of getting tested and communicating. So you have to think about how often is this person getting tested, and how often have they gotten tested given the number of partners that they're having. So the way that I think that people should think about this is, if you're trying to especially be in a monogamous type of sexual relationship, then you're going to want your partner to probably get tested for STIs before they start having sex with you. That way you kind of know where they're at when it comes to STIs and STDs, and then you guys can start to have a monogamous relationship. Now, of course, not everybody's interested in that style of relationship. So the biggest thing here is open communication. What are your boundaries? How often do you want your partner to get tested? What types of precautions do you want them to take against, contracting STIs and STDs? Is it that they can go have sex with other people, but before they have sex with you again, they need to get tested? Or is that not something that is as important for you? There's a lot of people who are in the polyamorous or non-monogamous community who are talking about these topics and have a lot more in-depth real life experience with these types of conversations than I do. But the biggest thing is, don't shy away from the conversation. Have a conversation, do some research, talk to perhaps other people who are juggling multiple sexual partners, see what they're doing, and communicate that to your partner. And then the last thing, like I mentioned before, is trust. Again, trust is so important, because unfortunately, if you're with someone that you don't trust, they may disrespect your boundary. And so you also have to be cognizant of that. And you need to be cognizant of the fact that you need to have sex with people that you can trust. It's not about being monogamous. It's not about the number of partners you're having. That's kind of just a bit of a distraction from the real conversation, which is about trust and communication.
Right. Well, that is all for tonight. I don't want to keep you guys any longer. Thank you so much, Maya. Next week, I don't remember next week's topic off the top of my head.
Yeah, so next week we're planning to talk more about destigmatization as it relates to STIs and STDs, and how to slow the transmission of STIs and STDs, which of course we'll talk briefly about condoms and stuff like that again, but really, especially as a sociologist, I have a lot of different ways of approaching this question besides just like repeating over and over again that people should use condoms.
Definitely. And where can we find you? Where should we follow you?
Yeah, so I have a page called At Intimacy with Maya. It's pinned down below. So please follow me there. I post weekly content, sometimes more often. But you know, it's a lot to juggle being a grad student as well. So I post weekly content, and soon I'll have an article coming out called A Love Letter to Black Women Dating. And so I would love for people to read that as well.
Thank you so much. Make sure you guys tune in next Wednesday where we're going to talk about STIs and STDs. And this has been Let's Talk About Sex with Intimacy with Maya.
Bye.
Good night, everyone.
I'll see all of you guys next week. Thanks so much.